Hello, everyone. I am Northern Westman, and you're listening to the Disciple Hour, episode 6. I am joined by Ian and Gentile Gentleman, and today's topic is waiting for God. Gentlemen, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Hey, I'm Ian. Glad to be here.
And I'm the Gentile. Glad to be here as well.
And we might be joined by John Malt. He is on his way, apparently, but we'll see. But I just want to start by saying the topic for waiting for God is even in the early chapters in Genesis, we see this topic, waiting for God. The earliest example I know is when God put Adam to sleep. Adam was unhappy. God made all these animals for him, like whoop, a giraffe. Adam was like, no. Then whoop, a lion. No. And all the animals. He named all the animals. But he was still sad. Poor Adam. And so God put him to sleep. And God removed his ribs, the lower ribs, and created Eve out of the rib. And when Adam woke up, he had a partner and he became happy. And this is a funny story because I actually got the message a few months ago. The way God talks to me is, it's either through verses or, well, it's kind of unique, but I got the message that God wanted to put me to sleep. And then that's interesting. Like, why would God want me to sleep? But it refers to this verse, Adam and Eve. So I'm not married, and I would very much like to be married and have plenty of kids, if God is willing to bless me with it. And sometimes I become impatient. I ask, when or where and when God. And so then I got this message from God, go to sleep. I'm going to put you to sleep. And so that means that God is working on me. He's going to work on me. And for how long will I be asleep? I have no idea. And so that relates to waiting for God, this topic. And we have some interesting things to talk about. Gentlemen, would either of you like to comment on this, going to sleep, waiting for God?
The best thing that comes to my mind when I think about you saying that is not so much that you'll be asleep, but perhaps that you'll find her as soon as you decide to stop looking for her.
Yeah, yeah, that is. I have thought about that too.
Yeah, I think that there really is, I think if you look at Christianity as a whole, it is sort of a low time preference religion that, if you want to put it that way. I mean, there's a lot about working. I mean, you know, I think God is frequently giving commands to work hard and to build and to create, and these are things that take time. And there's the Bible isn't about instant gratification. I mean, even if you look at doctrines like sanctification by faith, I mean, it's an ongoing process. So I think that God does want us to put in the work as well. He wants us to lay the groundwork in our lives and be constantly, gradually getting closer to Him and His heart and His mind. And by doing so, that that'll provide a framework where he can, when he wants to give us his blessings, that, we'll be ready for them and we can glorify him the most with them. So yes, definitely we have to wait on God, but we also, part of that is, being willing to do the work on our part.
Amen. And there is actually one thought that I had when we decided this topic is God actually waiting for us? So, God wants to work through us, and I truly believe that the kingdom will only come when God can work through as many of us as He can, when enough of us submit to Him.
Well, absolutely. And, scripturally, when God talks about marriage, he specifically says that a man shall leave his mother and father and shall cleave to his wife, and they will become one flesh. And it's interesting because we just had a sermon yesterday in my church about, does God care about gender? With a lot of the talk these days about how gender doesn't exist, and the social construct of gender identity. He did this really long sermon, and he went over all the scriptures that include a gender specific verse, something that was for men and for women, and specifically when it comes to marriage and initiating marriage and finding a partner, it's always addressed towards men. There's always this responsibility put on us for that. And most of the verses that are for women is the responsibility of, once she is married, how does she support and cooperate with her husband? And I thought that was very interesting, and it's just so funny that I had this sermon at my church just the day before we have this conversation.
Oh, that is that is interesting, and that's God working.
Always. I know I asked one of the guys working in my church, I was like, hey, you got to send me this file. I need to share this with some people, because once we show everyone how based our church is, we're going to get some solid folks in here. So I'm waiting to get that data so I can share it. You guys are going to get a kick out of it.
Oh yeah, I'd love to. Um, oh man, I have to tell you one funny story. Once when I was like, asking God, where, when, where, blah blah blah, you know, nagging. Then one time, a something really funny happened on my YouTube feed. I got a video recommended out of nowhere, and it was called "Why Does God Want You to Be Alone?" And I was like, "Are you kidding me?" Like,
It's
this is
Google,
the
man. They're always listening. They caught you through the speaker in your phone.
yeah, maybe, but I took it as God telling me something, because the video was actually pretty good. I did click it because I was so interested. But basically, it's this theme that we're talking about here. Men always become stronger when they are alone with God. You're not really alone. You are with God. God is with you. Moses, he was alone in the desert, but he became much stronger. Jesus went into the desert uh, and came out stronger. And Jacob, he was alone. He had to leave his home because of Esau. Well, he betrayed his brother and tricked him twice. He had to leave. He was alone, and he became stronger. And so that was basically the message. The it was interesting. you grow in wisdom when you are alone with God, and wisdom is always good. It's the best. It's one of the best things you can have in life is good wisdom.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's kind of part of the journey of being a man. We have to go through the fire, as it were. We have to be tested. We have to overcome and get stronger. So that's part of, you know, something we all have to go through as men.
Yeah, and I'm partial, I suppose, to thinking that more so, men have to be very fully formed, and responsible and kind of be, the man they're going to be for the rest of their life when they get married, because they have to kind of already be able to take that responsibility in that role. Whereas I think women get a little bit more of a grace period to where even if they haven't fully matured, you know, once, down the line after getting married, they become a mother, they mature almost instantly. There's this automatic maturity switch that flips in women, at least in what I've seen. And so it does really seem like there is a lot of importance for men to kind of be very fully, engaged and have their purpose and their plan and to be fully formed as a person when they get married, because so much hinges on them, whereas women will kind of naturally get this maturity, with the next step of their life when they start to have children.
That's a very good point. Yes.
On the subject of waiting for God, something we were kind of talking about before we started, but I think in some ways modern day churches do kind of give the wrong message about what it means to wait for God. Like, because I remember when I was growing up, for example, when I was, a young man, I was in typical evangelical Christian circles, and the message we often heard was that, like, God will just make everything happen in His time, which is kind of a vague message, but there wasn't as much talk about, really preparing yourself, and really there wasn't a lot of real guidance on like how to prepare yourself for God's time, as it were. So, and when I was in college, there's a lot of talk about finding, quote, the one, meaning the person God wants you to marry, and there was the message is just, God will make it happen in His time, but you know, for some of us at least, well, we were kind of confused, like, well, what do I even have to do to be a good husband? What do I have to do to be a good man? Like, it was just kind of assumed that you would figure that out, but there wasn't really any guidance. So, I think that, there is a problem with a lot of, I guess, mainstream Christianity today, and that there isn't much guidance about what it means to be a man, or, how to be the husband or the wife that you need to be, because it's more of this sort of vague, sort of broad message about, you know, about what you have to do.
Oh, for sure. I mean, um, yeah, you can write a long essay, even a book, on what it means to be a man.
Well, and that is interesting to bring up, a lot about how mainstream churches really teach a lot of these messages, and it's horrible to say, but I really think our own ministers have turned more people away from Christianity than anything else. By watering down the message and really giving these weak, messages that don't really guide anybody. I think there's a lot of people that are turned away by that. They see a lack of seriousness. They really see a lack of, you know, guidance that comes from churches, because they are always giving you this vague, well, things are going to work out. You just got to, God's going to take care of it, so you don't worry about it. Just stop caring, and that may sound good to certain types of people, but that usually doesn't sound good to Christians. Christians want to work hard. They want to, kind of fill that role. And churches, they really don't ever commit to solid guidance, or really trying to teach people, how to live that godly life, which is going to have the results of good things happening to you. God prescribes our behavior for us, because if we live that way, good things will happen. And that is, in a way, God helping us get things. But they never preach about that. They always just preach that, you just hang out and God will one day show up and give you what you need.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I think in some ways it's a problem that, our societies have they kind of been more or less healthy in terms of the fact that they encourage a fairly moral lifestyle. They encourage, you know, there's a general sense that, children are trained to be future, husbands, wives, fathers, mothers. Like that was just kind of seen as the normal path in life that people took for granted. But it's only been in the last few decades where they start pushing this idea of like, you can just do whatever you want in life. You can just be whatever you want to be. Like there's no real like life path that society needs you to follow. So, now we have it where the messages have become ambiguous and there's no clear guidance on, what it means to fulfill, God's plan for your life. And, I guess somebody might say, well, there's always exceptions. There's always people who don't fit the mold. There's always people who don't live the conventional, who don't take the conventional path in life. Sure, but I think most people, they need that life path. They need that guidance of like, your job is to start a family, and it's not just to, you know, have a fulfilling career necessarily, or have a, pursue personal pleasures and be well traveled and have a life of constant excitement. Like, part of life is, building the next generation. And I don't know if we're getting off the topic of waiting for God, but that is something that often gets lost. And I think that, uh, like you're saying, it just, I guess I don't want to go into too much detail about my own life, but I think I'm living proof that just sitting around waiting for God to do stuff produce uh doesn't produce all the good things in life. You have to really know what you're doing. You have to have guidance. You have to have a path, and you have to take action before stuff really starts to happen.
Yeah. That's a good point. I'm a bit conflicted by all of this.
Sorry, I was logged in and logged out, but I'm pretty sure that happened fast enough for me to pick right up. Um, what I was going to say was, you know, I don't want to say anything that will make anyone listening to our podcast uncomfortable. And, for the ladies, I don't mean this as anything negative towards women, but there has been a very big feminization of how preachers and ministers and Christianity is approached. Just like you said, Ian, who's the person who's going to tell you that you could be anything in the world? Like it's your mom. Your mom, even if you're a little Jimmy and you have an IQ of 70, your mom's still going to tell you that you could be the president and an astronaut, because your mom just wants you to feel good. Whereas your father, he's the one who's going to sit you down and say, look, if you can't be smart, you better be strong. And if you're going to be neither, you're not going to have a good life. And he's going to make sure that you know your limitations, but that you still make the best out of it. That's a very fatherly love to give, where it's like, look, Tim, love you, buddy, but you can't be the president. You just don't have that kind of thing in you, but you can be a really great this and that. And your father will pick that strength and he'll work on it with you, and Christianity has really lost that. We've really lost this idea that when you walk into church, no, you're not good enough, that you have improvement to do and that you have work to do, and that we could all be doing a better job. And that if you're not constantly exercising your spiritual relationship with God, if you're not working harder, if you're not spending more time with your family as men, if as mothers you are spending not enough time with your family, because you're focusing too much on these things that should take a back seat to your family, there's no church that really lets people know what they're not doing right and what they should improve. They're just telling everybody that you're awesome, you're saved by grace, don't even worry about it. Doesn't matter how many children you touch or how many of this, that, and the other thing, horrible thing that you do. As long as you accept Jesus in your heart, you're good to be here. There is no push to make Christians stronger and to make them more solid and to really make them much more principled and disciplined. There is none of that. There's none of that fatherly discipline coming from preachers anymore. And I think it's so lacking, especially for men when they go to church.
Amen to that. Yeah.
Yes, that's a good point. I mean, really, I think even the whole idea of, just wait for God and things will happen. I mean, that is kind of feminine because, like,
Mm-hmm.
I think for a lot of women, that is maybe more of a message that can apply to them that, I think when it comes to finding, a husband or wife, like, men have to prove themselves, whereas women just kind of have to be virtuous and be nice. And, for most of them, that's going to be enough for them to find a good husband because, like, that's, I guess we've all heard the saying that, women are born rich but become poor, but men are born poor and become richer. Like, men are work in progress where we have to develop ourselves and gain more resources over the course of our life. Whereas with women, it's like, you're young, you're pretty and youthful and vital. And, as you get older, you're going to become less pretty and, less robust. But, it's like those younger years are as key to finding a partner. So I guess, like, with women, it's like more, they just have to cultivate that, good spirit and be virtuous. And for a lot of them, for most of them at least, that's going to help them find a good husband. But for men, that message doesn't really work. So it does kind of speak to how things are becoming more feminized.
Well, yeah, the most important decision a woman will ever make is who is she going to marry? Because if you marry the wrong guy and you have one or two kids and then you leave him, now you have to try and get remarried, with someone else's children. The decision of who you're going to marry decides what kind of life a woman is going to have. Whereas for men, I mean, I guess these days with, divorce laws and family law, the way that it is, that has become equally as important for men. But at least, traditionally, the most important thing for men was what skill am I going to acquire that's going to allow me to get resources so that I can get married and provide for my kids. And then you had to make a daily decision to get up and work hard every day. Right. So it was just a different decision process, whereas men had to, like you just said, they had to pick something that was going to pay off in the end. Whereas women have to make a vital decision in the beginning or the end is going to be terrible for them.
Yeah.
Northern Westman, I mean, you said you were conflicted about something earlier. Was that something you wanted to go into detail about?
Mm,
Ooh, putting you on the spot. What you gonna do?
yeah.
We can cut
It's
this out if
just,
we need to.
I'm thinking like, I've said this before. I don't want to be a false teacher. So now I just have to be, honest and say that I'm not quite sure about this. Waiting for God. Now I'm thinking, is this a total subversion? Because when we were discussing this topic, this just thought came to my mind, just being, is God actually waiting for you? And it's just funny how it happened because, it was almost like a, eureka moment, and
Mm.
what you said, Chantal, it really made sense. And so I'm thinking, like, is this some? And again, like you said, I don't want to be rude to the women, but is this a feminized subversion of Christianity. So I'm gonna have to
Are
do.
you referring to what I said before the podcast?
No. What you were talking about now, like
Yeah.
um, that just waiting and doing nothing is not really masculine.
Well, I mean, there's waiting and putting in the work, and there's waiting and doing
Mhm.
nothing. I mean, those are
Yeah,
two
yeah.
different things, I think.
Oh, sure. I mean, yeah, being patient and putting in the work, definitely. Yeah, that's what you should do. But
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to go. I'll have to look up Bible verses, more Bible verses about quote unquote waiting for God, because
Yeah.
usually it's God waiting for us. He wants to work through us if you let him. Uh,
And I'll kind of repeat, what I said before the podcast. There's a difference between knowing and having faith that all things are going to work out, right? Like having that optimistic outlook, like no matter what, God will take care of me. That's true. But it's not the same as saying you don't have responsibility. And I'll even go back to one of the examples I gave. In our lives, our generation, we have the Bible. We have all these stories and examples, um, and all of these precedents that are set out for us to learn from. Whereas people that actually lived, through these stories that we're looking at, they didn't have the Bible. King David didn't have, the entirety of the Bible. And Abraham didn't have a Bible really at all, and neither did Noah or Adam or anyone else. They didn't have a blueprint or a manuscript, to work off of, and we do. So there is a difference there. King David, yes, his job might have been to just live his life until Goliath, showed up, but he still had to, be brave and throw the stone. God made sure that one stone slayed the giant, but he still had to show up and fling that stone. So even in their day, there was still something you had to do. And Joshua, he had to march around Jericho. God could have knocked down the walls just for him without them having to do anything, but he still said, no, you're going to walk around it for 7 days and then I'll do it. There was still work that everyone in the Bible had to put in order for God to give them the result that he promised. There's never a free ride, in any of those stories. And especially in our time, God is working a little bit less directly with us. He isn't talking directly to us like he was with David or like he was with Jacob or Abraham. There's less of his involvement. And so that behooves us even more that, yes, in the end, God will make everything work out according to his plan. But I still have the responsibility to get out there and do something and hope that God guides my steps. He can't guide your steps if you refuse to walk. You have to start walking. And then somewhere along the path, he'll nudge you in the right direction.
right. So in essence, be strong, uh, develop your skills, work out, be happy, and do God's will, and everything will be fine. Did I get it right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah,
So,
Yeah.
there is the promise, but we all have to do work, right?
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm thinking about Abraham. I mean, wasn't he really old when he finally became a father? And, he'd been faithful his whole life. That was
Mm.
why God chose him, even though he was
Yeah.
an old man. I mean, he had to wait a long time to, see the fruit of his faithfulness pay off, but eventually it did.
Yeah. And I mean, yeah, even, his wife was, barren. Uh, and still, the guy had faith. It's like
Mhm.
the guy just kept on going. Uh, it's remarkable.
Well, and that is actually a really great point, Ian. Man, just right out of left field with the perfect thing to say. Because Abraham, when you really think about it, he didn't even live to see God's promise to him. He only had one son, and his son only had, two sons. So during his lifetime, even though God said your descendants will be as numerous as the stars, he only lived long enough to see 3 of them. I mean, imagine if God promised you hundreds of millions of descendants and you only had one son, and that son only had 2 sons. Well, the amount of faith that he had to have to just know that God was eventually going to fulfill that promise, but he didn't fulfill it in his lifetime. He fulfilled it generations later. And so that's kind of another interesting point, is that we might think we know what God's plan is for us. And maybe our plan is, well, I'm going to have 12 kids. Well, maybe you might only have 2 kids, and those are the only ones you're going to see. But those kids might go on to only have 1 or 2 kids, and eventually someone in your line might have 25 or 30, descendants from their children. But it might not be something you live to see, but it doesn't mean it's not going to happen. So that also brings up a very interesting point. God might give us what we want, but we might not live to see it. He might give it to our descendants. So that's also a very interesting point. Like, that really, really hit a nerve there for me.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it goes back to what you were saying. Like, we need to be patient and recognize that, you know, our job is to be faithful in what God's given us, and you know, maybe we're laying the groundwork for something we're not even sure of yet, but God knows.
Yeah, but we're this theme was kind of tailored around getting married and finding a woman. Um, Even though, I mean, every man craves it, I guess. Ultimately, it's not what matters. I mean, in heaven, according to this, I think it's in Luke. Apparently, as I understand it, um, there are no marriages in heaven, and so you're talking about an eternal life where being married is not a part of the equation, and that's eternal. So you're talking about a couple of decades here on Earth being married versus eternity not married, and so that's ultimately what matters. I'm not making an excuse for myself. I'm just saying, what matters is that you, like you've been saying, guys, putting in the work, doing God's will, and maybe along the way, God will bless you with a wife and kids. So that's ultimately what you should be focused on. Men, they need motivation. I don't go to the gym unless I'm motivated. You need both discipline and motivation, right? Uh, in my case, the discipline comes after the motivation, right? I discipline myself when I'm motivated, and so the motivation should be to do God's will, see His kingdom, and so you need to be the best version that you can possibly be of yourself, and work on your skills, um, be fit. Gluttony, after all, is a sin. uh, Work out, practice your skills, eat well, and be grateful for everything He has given you, and pray that He will give you more. That there is this parable that Jesus gave. I think it was in Luke, where He talked about the judge. Someone was nagging the judge like all the time, and finally the judge just had enough. And I can't remember what he did for him, like pardoned him or something. Uh, the
I think it
parable
was they
means.
wanted a fair trial about
Oh, right.
to
Okay.
settle the dispute.
Yeah. Right. Right. Yes. And now this was just some man, who was a judge, but the Father in heaven, uh, he is of course much more gracious, right? And so if you ask him, uh, he will give you. That is my belief that he will. But this goes back to what you were saying to me, Gentile, at the very beginning. If you're not looking for a wife, maybe that's the way to go. You should just work on yourself, work hard, and do God's will, and quote unquote, go to sleep. Don't think about getting married, and that's really the way to live your life. And it's funny that I just remembered. Me and my friend were talking about this. There is a preacher, I've talked about him before, Ivo Sasek in the German Switzerland. He, lived his life like that from the age of 20, I think, when he got saved. And for like either 1.5 decades or 2 decades or something, he got married. And he had just been living this life of serving God and working on himself. And he was almost disappointed that he had to stop that now, and he would now have to provide for a family. I'm not sure if I would ever think that way, but it was just funny to me that a man could really feel so much joy in serving God and working on himself that he would actually just almost be disappointed in getting married. If that's your attitude, then I believe that God will truly bless you. And I'll give you the word. Go on, guys.
Yeah,
Well,
it's I was going to say, just earlier today, I was reading the book My Utmost for His Highest by Oswald Chambers, and today's devotion for May 7th, the day we're recording this, like he's talking about how let me see if I can pull it up here a second. Like he's saying he's asking, like he mentions where Jesus asks, how many of you really thought about the cost of discipleship? And he's like, are we really? And it made me think about myself. Like, am I really committed? Would I risk everything for Jesus Christ? Would I, am I that passionate to where, I could be a disciple and I'm willing to be rejected by, family, friends, all the things that I love? Would I be willing to give up all that for the sake of Christ? I mean, it's challenging. Sometimes I don't know that, I don't know that if I have that level of faith or if I have that level of courage sometimes, so, but it really made me think that, maybe that's the point I need to get to before I can really see the real true blessings of God. That, like, if I could get to the point where, you know, like that guy you were talking about, Northern, who, he just loved, the work of serving the Lord so much that, everything else was secondary to him. I mean, I think that's a beautiful thing, and I think it's almost like something to aspire to, really.
well, being in our sphere, in our circle, you kind of already have decided, that you care about something that most people would reject you for. Um, and that didn't even have to be Jesus Christ. So don't sell yourself short. You already are the kind of person who sees, a lot of the lies, and it would be easier to go along with them, and you don't.
Yeah.
And there's a little bit of proving ground you've kind of already walked on in that regard.
Okay, that's an excellent point. And that made me feel better, so thank you. But
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's one reason why, us in this group, we really do kind of feel, each other's, spiritual, ness and our struggle of going through this is that, we've already struggled for something else. And that's something, we would place second behind, God and Jesus Christ. And so I just feel like if we absolutely had to, that's already showing that we're that kind of person. We are that kind of person who's willing to put up with ostracization and our friends and family not necessarily agreeing with what we're going to do. I mean, we kind of already have that personality, which I think has primed us, to really understand that part of it. But I do think it is still good to be very humble and questioning, and always questioning ourselves, am I really, committed enough, and how can I commit more? I still think that's a good thing to do, but just something to, make you feel a little bit better. I think you already have a lot of practice with that.
Mhm.
Sure, but I mean, I guess there's also, in some ways, you have the option of just kind of, I don't like the term hiding your power level, but if you know what I mean, it's like where you don't go around telling everybody what you believe about these things. You just, it's easy to just kind of blend in and not discuss certain things. But, that's one thing I guess I struggle with, is that I have a hard time talking to people about some of these things, even though I do believe that they're important, and I do believe that they, these are things that we need to be discussing with those we love. Because, I ask myself, if I don't discuss these issues with the people I love, do I really love them? If I genuinely believe that, uh, on the other side of, if I really believe that, the things I believe, that lives hang in the balance, that, good and evil's in the balance, like, and yet I don't discuss these things with the people I care about, am I really loving them? So it's not like I'm going to be like playing the villain or anything like that. Just, I have to be honest about why these things matter, because a lot of people don't understand.
Well, I mean, you definitely do have a point in the sense that, we do want people to ask us, these things. And I think there's one common theme, that we can get not only from the Bible, but just from, life in general, is that people usually don't buy into an idea just because you convince them of it. There has to be results. And that seems kind of odd to us, but really when you think about it, why do so many people buy into, what Bill Gates says, or what Elon Musk says, or any of these other people? Why are they so influential when very smart people can see that they're really not actually all that smart? And the reason why is results. Most people in the world, they put their emphasis on money. Like, oh, if you're rich, then you must know something. And so they're much more likely to listen to you. In our circle, people, trying to be like us, our emphasis isn't on money. Our emphasis is on the kind of person that you are, the kind of family that you have, what are your results? People are always more willing to listen to you when they see your life. And they're like, wow, you actually have a very decent life. Like, what are you doing? What is it that, gave this to you? And they're always so much more willing to listen to you. So it is important not to just talk at people, but to really cause people to turn their head and notice that, oh, wow, this person really has a lot of nice things that I wish I had. He has a great relationship with his wife. He has a handful of kids and they're well behaved. And he still lives a comfortable, modest life, but it's enough for him, and how can I be that way? Once you have people with that attitude of like, how can I be like you? They become much more open to your message, and then the right kind of people that focus on the right kind of thing will be open to it. Everyone wants to be like Bill Gates in the world because they just want the money. So like, oh yeah, yeah, he might be, a psychopathic, population controlist, but he's really rich. So if I can just be like Bill Gates, I'll get really rich. That really is what drives people. It's not so much that they make sense. It's just that they have good results. And so it's on us to have good results so that people come to us and they ask us, wow, like what can I do? What example can I follow to get the results you have? So that's, at least that's something that I've always realized, really works on people.
Ah, that's so
That's a
good.
good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard many people, I've heard stories about people who brought others to Christ just by simply living a good life and showing love to them in ways that others don't. Like, I remember hearing a story about a woman who, I guess she was Catholic, or she was like sort of nominally Christian, but she wasn't really a very devout person. And she was in the hospital, and she said she noticed that the nurses there tended to be not very friendly, but there was one nurse who was really was really kind and caring, and she could see there's something different about her, and she asked her, why are you different than all the other nurses? And she said, well, yeah, I guess the only thing is that I'm a Christian. And that really helped lead this woman who was the patient to Christ. I mean, so they can see that there's something different about you, and that there's something good there that they want to be a part of. I mean, that will be a good tool, that will be a good witness to others, and it will produce results. So yeah, just confirming what you're saying.
Oh, totally. Thank you. Before we get too off of it, I did want to say something about what Westman said earlier, about about how, what is more important and what the goal is yes, in God's coming kingdom, do we want to be there? And of course we do. But how do we get there? I guess I just wanted to mention that we do have to remember, how do we earn that? A lot of people ask, like, what's the meaning of life? And they never have an answer. And for us, the answer is very simple. Why did God give us a limited time on the planet if he was going to make an eternal kingdom following? Why didn't he just make his eternal perfect kingdom first off? Well, and of course, the reason why is he's a good father. And he said, hey, here's 100 years. I want you to show me what you're going to do with this 100 years. And if you take this 100 years and you're productive, like how we mentioned in a past podcast, if you're that good servant who takes those 10 talents and turns it into 20 talents in your 100 years, then I'm going to put you in charge of 10 cities in the future kingdom, right? And if you're the wicked servant and I gave you 100 years and you didn't do anything productive with it, why would I give you more life? Why would I give you eternity to spend eternity doing absolutely nothing? And for us, that might seem harsh, with modern day morality, that like, well, why doesn't everyone just get eternal life? And it's like, well, because he's not a bad father. He's not going to take a spoiled, cruel, evil child and give that child eternity and power, because he would be a bad father. He's a good father, and in a father's love, he's going to, basically tell you, like, look, I gave you this chance. I gave you this 100 years and you didn't appreciate what I gave you. So why would you appreciate the future creation? You're only going to ruin it for your brothers and your sisters. Right. And, and I think for a lot of us, we're not going to be in charge of talents or cities, but we're going to be in charge of people. Christ is the head of every man. And every man is the head of his wife, and every wife is the head of her children, right? So being a man, being a good father, being a good spiritual leader, being the Christ-like example in your children and your wife's life, is you proving that you deserve that eternity. Like, I can take that 100 years and turn it into talents, and for women, it's, I raised good children. And I loved them and I nurtured them and I was submissive to my husband just as I should be submissive to God. So I took my 100 years and turned it into talents. And because the mother and the father both did, their children went on to do so, right? And so even though it's perfectly fine not to worry about getting married, because it will come, if you're a good man, you will find a woman who wants to marry you. We just have to keep in mind that that's the talent that we're trying to cultivate. God gave us time, and now we have to turn that time into talents so that we can be good servants. And again, this really gets missed in so many of these mainstream churches. They don't tell people, no, you have to go out there and acquire talents so that you can show God that you took his investment and made it profitable. You have to be a good servant.
Amen.
Amen. Yeah. Yeah, those were really good last words. I don't really have anything to add. I fully agree, and
Yeah, I think this has been a great discussion here.
amen.
Oh, absolutely. And I should have had my daughter with me so she could cry through the whole thing, so that everyone could really see what it's like. No, I'm totally kidding. Having children is the best thing in the world. You should all have them.
I definitely hope to.
My wife walked in with our daughter. I don't know if you guys heard her crying a minute ago in the background, but she walked in with our daughter crying and saw me on the phone, and she's like, "Oh crap!" and turned around and like walked back out of the room. I was like, "That's good, thanks."
Yeah, we heard her crying, but it's totally cool.
Yeah, it's cute.
Yeah, baby cries are weird. They grow on you. You know, when it won't stop, it's kind of like, oh goodness gracious. But every once in a while, she'll like whimper or cry, and you're just like, oh, it becomes endearing.
I mean, yeah. I'm not gonna get into it, but yeah, you're right. Anyway, this has been an excellent discussion, and I thank you both for joining. Thank you all for listening, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye for now.
God bless.
See you later. God bless.